Welcome to Brave Together Parenting, an empowering and truly helpful podcast for the parents of children with disabilities and all unique needs.
I feel like attending to the moment is not specific to the good times. Just because it's bad doesn't mean you just push it aside. I feel like I have to live in it to get through it.
Hello, brave friends. It's Jessica Pate here, and I am your host for this story episode. I'm a fellow caregiving brave mom, and I'm the founder of the nonprofit organization We Are Brave Together. And one fun fact about me, in the spirit of our guest's book about lessons learned in dance, did you know that I was on drill team in high school? Yes, for a couple of years. I don't even know if they exist anymore in today's world. Probably not. But yes, I was on the drill team. I did those parades. I wore all the costumes, the bodysuits, the white knee-high boots, the white hat, all of it. Yeah, I don't regret it. I chuckle as I think about it now and the costumes and all of that. But I loved it. I loved my friends and I loved the experiences, and it was really fun to perform. Today, we have a story episode for you. This is episode 188, and these are true stories from a moment in the life of a caregiving parent. We hear a crafted story and then have a conversation with our guest that goes deeper into their experience. Today's guest is Joanne De Simone, and she's a graduate of Hunter College in New York with degrees in dance and special education. She has two sons, one with a rare brain malformation called lysencephaly, and one on the autism spectrum. The story she shares is about her experience being in public with her child on the autism spectrum. A quick reminder to everyone to please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, share our podcast with your friends, join our Facebook group, follow us on Instagram, and if you want to see all the faces behind this podcast, look for all our episodes this season on our We Are Brave Together YouTube channel. We thank you in advance. I'll let Joanne take it from here.
On an otherwise uneventful day, the four of us went to a local drugstore and ran into some neighbors. The longer we talked, the more overactive Sebastian became. In between my sentences, I would redirect him. "Don't touch that. Stay over here. Come closer." I got a strong sense someone was watching me. I continued to instruct Sebastian. "Stop jumping. Look at this toy." He managed to escape my field of vision when I took a moment to care for Benjamin, but I quickly found him in the next aisle. As we continued the conversation with our friends, a woman standing idle on a lengthy checkout line distracted me. Although I never made eye contact with her, she scowled in our direction from time to time. I'd guess she was in her late 60s and wore a spaghetti-strapped white and red floral sundress with 3-inch red pumps. From behind, I'd assumed she was a much younger woman. The conflict between my expectations and reality amused me. Surely she wasn't annoyed at us. I have a habit of being paranoid that I'm doing something wrong at any given time. I attribute this to 13 years of Catholic school. Sebastian's patience for our shopping expedition had clearly peaked. I took him to the store's vestibule. It was a large open space between two sets of automatic sliding doors, where we could see ourselves on the store's security television. This had a calming effect on Sebastian, despite the fact that our presence was frequently activating the automatic doors. As we talked about our images, red pumps huffed by us. Her aggravation toward us was real. My true Brooklyn spirit boiled to the surface. "What is your problem?" "You should put him on a leash. My dog is better trained." A man standing outside handed her a dog leash. I yelled something back, but it didn't make an impact as they calmly proceeded down the street. I wanted to summon my South Brooklyn warrior and chase her down, but I couldn't leave Sebastian unattended, still yelling after her, furious that I hadn't thrown the ultimate insult back. I turned to make eye contact with John for his support. He and the long line of customers were staring at me. Their horrified faces snapped me out of my rage. They hadn't heard the exchange. From their point of view, I was experiencing an unprompted breakdown. For Sebastian's entire life, I had tried to be the picture of strength my mother had modeled for me, but I was all out of fight. It was at that very moment I realized Brooklyn was no longer the place to raise my sons. That woman embodied everything I wanted to leave. I wouldn't live in a community that had so little tolerance. My supportive neighbors weren't enough to compensate for our lack of belonging. Like any unhealthy relationship, I had to face the fact that my love affair with Kings County needed to end. I didn't want to be furious in the middle of the vestibule, or frantic in the middle of a major life decision. The door slid open, and we stepped out.
There are so many things that I love about Joanne's story. And one, this is a moment that so many of us can relate to. We've all been in public and we've seen that stranger scowl at us, haven't we? We've all experienced that incredible discomfort when our child starts to melt down, act out, or just act in the way that they act that's different than everyone else. I also want to note that when we were having this conversation and she's talking about her book, Fall in Recovery, I could really feel it in my body, just the thought of how dance can be so therapeutic and cathartic and healing and freeing. Anyways, it was kind of a wild little moment that I experienced. Her story was about getting out of New York to a more accepting environment, but her interview goes deeper into Joanne's journey working with the school district to get the right services and supports. She has some really great insights being a special educator herself. We also talk about her book, which I mentioned. It's called Fall in Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance. It is available for purchase wherever books are found now. So please enjoy my conversation with Joanne De Simone. Hi, Joanne. Welcome to Brave Together Parenting. I'm so glad that you submitted a story. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Jessica.
Well, I was hooked because you are such a good writer. When I just began your story, I was immediately hooked. I know our listeners will appreciate your story because it happens to so many of us when we're out trying to be out in the world with our kids. So I know this will resonate. I know so many people are like, yep, me too. I've been there. I understand. So why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your family, your background, your work?
Sure. So currently I'm working as a special education parent advocate. I work for a nonprofit in New Jersey. So I help parents navigate the system. And if they're having trouble, I try to, help them brainstorm. I'll help them write letters, all of that, just so that they can navigate the special education world. Prior to the advocacy work, I was actually a special education teacher. And prior to that, I was a professional dancer. So I've been all over the place, but I always work with kids. I started teaching gymnastics when I was 14. So I always loved working with children. I have two children, two boys. They're now 25 and 21. My oldest son, Benjamin, has a rare neurological disorder called lissencephaly. So he has cerebral palsy. He's in total care. He's quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So he doesn't walk, he doesn't talk, he can't use his hands, he's got a feeding tube, and he's just the most joyous person that I've ever known. His natural way of being is happy, it's so helpful when you have a child with so many medical challenges.
Yes.
Yeah. My younger son, Sebastian, is on the autism spectrum, and he's actually currently going to an all-inclusive college program out of state. And he's an accomplished long-distance runner. He actually competes for the college. So that's been awesome. I love with him, he just always sees the good in people. Like if anybody does something a tad off, he'll say to me, but they're a good person, right? Like he's always looking to keep people on that high pedestal. My husband, John, works in the film business. We will be married for 31 years in just a few weeks. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's
Thanks.
amazing.
Right.
It is. It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
marriage and people are so complex, anyways, just that alone. And then you add kids with exponential needs, and it creates stress and extra caretaking. You know the drill. So 31 years. Congratulations.
Thank you. we're happy. We're happy to still be in it together.
What would you say? I know this is kind of a side question, but what would you say has contributed to a successful marriage over the long haul of caregiving?
You know, it's funny. I feel like when we got married, we were really good friends for a long time. And when we got married, as opposed to like some relationships that I had in the past, I felt like, there's no ownership here, right? Like we are two people. We are very different people, but we somehow managed to come together and make a better whole. But I think for us too, you have to know when to give the other person space. And in our situation, for sure, I feel like it's important to know that how you process and how they process is very different. And that's okay. But you have to remember to regroup every once in a while and make sure you're still on the same page.
That's good.
I think you have to give yourself and your partner a lot of grace. And that sometimes takes practice, but I think it's essential.
I agree. It takes a lot of practice because I think we go into marriage with a lot of expectations or a lot of ideas, and there can be a big gap between that and then when you throw in crisis, how you each handle that, process that, communicate through that, talk about it, not talk about it. Yeah, I think that's good. I think we do need to give each other space and breaks and grace because it's not easy. It's just not easy.
No marriage with any type, children, no children. I mean,
right.
Yeah, living is hard.
Just being human. Can we just humaning together is hard. In the same house is hard. That is true. That's true. So, Joanne, tell us about this story this day. Take us back.
Sure. So this was a time in our life where we were in crisis to begin with. How do you always find the person who can lean in on that, right? But we were in a situation where Sebastian he was in kindergarten, and it was just a miserable school year for him. He was in an inclusion class, and he was always the kind of kid that just fell perfectly in the cracks, right? He didn't belong in an ABA class, but this inclusion class was not the answer. And we just spent the whole year with all, what's going wrong? He's not doing his work, all of this stuff. We had a lawyer, we were suing for private school, funding. And this happened in the late spring. We had gotten to the point where we'd looked for schools through all the boroughs in New York. We finally found one that we thought would be a good fit for him. And we had a meeting with the district, and they agreed to private school funding. But the day before the meeting, the school we wanted him to go to filled up. So he had no seat in the school. So the public school he was in didn't want him, and we had nowhere to send him. And it was, late in the school year. So we were like, where's he going to go? He fits nowhere. So ultimately we moved. But this day, we go into the local drugstore and we run into some neighbors and we're just having a conversation and we meet this miserable interaction with this woman. And I was done. It was good because it was a moment where I was like, that's it. I'm finished. We're packing up and we're going to find a new way of life, and our kids are going to fit in somewhere. This isn't about us. This is about the world, and we're just going to find our people and be happy. And that's luckily what happened.
How did you just not think? Because it is such, as a mother, to feel the heartbreak of my child doesn't fit anywhere. He's falling through the cracks. This school doesn't want him. And this school that we were holding out hope for is now not even possible. I mean, how did you just not sink into despair?
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay, you did. Okay. I appreciate the honesty.
I mean, it was a bottom for me, for sure. I was crushed. I was absolutely crushed. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And it tested everything we had. I mean, luckily at that time, I was investigating, moving out of state. I had friends that had moved and, had good experiences. And part of my battle was trying to convince my husband that this is something we should do immediately, because he was like, no, we shouldn't move. We don't have time. We can't do this. And I'm like, I think we can. And I think we have to. I think in order for us to stay married and in order for us to function, we have to do this.
So how did you get on the same page? Because I'm sure there are listeners out there who can relate.
Yeah, it was one step at a time. I mean, look, my husband's a very practical person too. And, I laid out all of the information that I had collected, and he had agreed to say, like, okay, let's go, let's take a look, let's see what it is. And we immediately actually found a school for our older son, Benjamin. And so we toured that school, and my husband, he's like, you know what? I think I could see him there. And then I was able to tour in the public school, and, I gave my husband all the information. But then it was also, maybe it was a little bit of an ultimatum where, New York had given us like a packet, like 20-page packet of schools to look at. And I'd been through that packet so many times, and I just gave it back to him. I mean, I was always doing all of the school stuff, but I gave it to him and I said, you find the school, I'm finished. And he was like, okay, maybe we can do this, because this is not something I can do.
And tell me a little bit more about Sebastian, his strengths and weaknesses or struggles. How did he not fit? I mean, I know our educational system is broken, so you don't have to convince me of that. But tell me more about Sebastian.
Yeah. I mean, when he was little, he was very connected to us, so for a long time, it was hard to get an actual diagnosis on, of him being on the spectrum. He, developed completely typically. And maybe when he was about 1.5, we realized his speech wasn't quite progressing. And, I'd worked with children with autism. I have a niece who's on the spectrum. So I think in our hearts, we knew something, but, it wasn't always easy to admit it. But he, so he was confusing. He right when you thought, oh, he's definitely on the spectrum, he would do something else. He was always making some kind of progress. But the speech lagged for sure. We had him in early intervention, and then he started in the preschool in a self-contained program, actually exactly where my older son had gone. And when he was transitioning into the preschool program, I think he was there for the summer, and we were getting ready for September. And I just wasn't in agreement with, they wanted to put him in an autistic class with kids who weren't verbal, and they were really using, an ABA type approach. And that wasn't something we had ever used with him, because he was so connected to us. And so we started butting heads with the system right away. And we thought, that's not what we want. And in New York, fortunately, there's this option on the preschool level that you can send your child to a neighborhood school, and they will put in a certified special educator as an itinerant teacher for a certain amount of hours a week. So we sent him to a typical school. He had this one-on-one teacher. He made phenomenal progress. Like within the first 3 months, he was toilet trained. He was using phrases. It was fantastic. And then his second year in preschool, where the class was larger and it was, I think too stimulating, it was a little more difficult for him to make the progress. So, we were stuck in this, inclusion we know in the right scenario can work for him. And academically, he was making progress. He really wasn't much behind at that stage of the game. But, when you're looking at a typical inclusion class in public school for kindergarten, there's 30 kids. There's 2 adults. It's overstimulating. He was an eloper, so we concerned and, And I remember at the time too, when we sat down for the transition IEP meeting for kindergarten, we weren't even allowed to say he was autistic because they never would have put him in the inclusion class. So they defined him as being, speech impaired. Yeah. So it was one of those things where it was like, I know he doesn't belong in the self-contained classes that the public schools have. They won't be the right fit. So this is the best we have to deal with. But I was nervous that it wasn't going to quite work. And right away, about a month in, it was going downhill.
And did it go downhill because he was exhibiting behaviors because it was just too large a class or too overstimulating, or what was it that you saw?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of avoidant behaviors. So he just didn't want to do the work, or he wasn't, as compliant as they wanted him to be. So, he was doing the work at home with me. I sort of devised a curriculum with him on the side that I was doing with him at home. So I knew he was capable, but I think it was too much in the room. Even I remember the first time we went to look, they had put him in a seat near the door. And I had told them, you might not want to do that because he's an eloper. So that confused me. I remember, the walls were just filled with stuff. There was no space. Everything was like hyperstimulating.
Right.
So I thought, he processes things slower than the other kids. So that was what was leading to the challenge. I think there was a lot they didn't understand, and I was trying to connect them with his occupational therapist who worked with him outside, hey, give him, a sensory diet, do this work. But I don't even think they had the resources to get it done. And they just sort of throw up their hands and, they wanted him out, but then they dragged it along and didn't let us get him out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. It was a series of odd events.
So he was placed in a general education classroom, and they think they're doing you and he a favor, but yet they weren't necessarily making accommodations that would make it a successful environment for him, it sounds like. And then you said he was an eloper, so that means a runner. And if he had a one-on-one for his safety, they probably wouldn't have allowed him to be in that classroom, I'm guessing. I mean, unless he really pushed.
Yeah. So originally they wouldn't agree to a one-on-one. And that was sort of just, what the Board of Ed was like, well, if he's going into an inclusion class, he shouldn't need that type of assistance. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to have this argument at the table. If he needs one later, then we'll reopen the case. And he did elope, actually. And, they called me and they were like, we lost him for a few minutes and I had a heart attack because, it was, in Brooklyn and near a highway, and it's not what you want to hear. Like, oh yeah, we just didn't know where he was. And luckily we found him on the 5th floor. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. It's
heart
so
attack.
Scary.
Exactly.
Yeah, very much.
Exactly. But they did end up giving him, of course, the 1-to-1, but by then they didn't think he belonged there. We ended up having a meeting with the principal who knew nothing about special education. And she brought us into this meeting and basically said, how did he even get here? So I felt like I had to, explain to her how the system works, and then explain to her that she can't just sit at the table and tell me he needs to go.
Right.
So, it was frustrating. They should have been prepared, but they weren't. And I didn't feel like even the services that he was getting, I didn't feel like they were working together. The counseling, the occupational therapy, the speech, like if you guys work together, you can make a plan and share that with the teachers. And then, we can make it a better situation, but it just kept spiraling.
Hey everyone, it's Jessica here, and I just want to give a shout out to our big, beautiful 5K sponsors, Rise Advocacy, GHJ Foundation, Torrance Memorial Medical Center, CMS Creative Management, the Pate family, and MRM Education. We are so grateful to these big sponsors, and we're so excited about our 5K event, which will really be a family event. It's going to be at Palos Verdes High School, October 20th, and it will be wheelchair friendly. It will be family friendly. It'll be stroller friendly. We are going to do laps around the track. We're going to have a food truck, a coffee cart, vendors, authors, artists. We cannot wait to see you. Registration is open now, and be a part of the big We Are Brave Together team. And if you are not local to these events, we're going to have one in San Diego and one in Palos Verdes. You can do your 5K anywhere in the world. We thank you so much for participating and supporting We Are Brave Together in this event. Joanne, what advice would you give parents who want their child to be included? So when I say included, I'm meaning in a general education classroom, maybe with supports. Different educational situations allow different things, but they're receiving pushback, or they're not maybe getting the accommodations that they really need for their child to be included.
Yeah, I think every situation can be a little bit different. I mean, the number one thing when you're trying to advocate for your kid is to really educate yourself and be fully informed and know what your rights are and what your children's rights are. And I think the goal is to present yourself as someone who's working collaboratively with the school. In the meantime, in the back, you're always collecting data and getting everything in writing so that if it all goes downhill, you have your information to back up and, go through due process. I'm a big fan of really being active all the time with your teachers, and get involved at the school as much as possible. Anything that gets you in the door helps. Mm-hmm. And then I think, if as much as it's a business, it's also a relationship. You have to build a relationship with the people who are working with your kids. This way, it cuts through how do I communicate with them, And I feel like, especially with teachers, there are a lot of teachers who are really in this for the right reason and their hands are tied. But if you have a good relationship with them, then you can really work together and figure out how to get past all the roadblocks. But, at the end of the day, if your child isn't getting what they need, then it requires you to sit down with them and say, hey, what's going on? I always, having been a teacher prior, I always like to imagine what's happening with the teacher, what's going on their end, and why it's difficult for them. Because when I sit at the table, I try to lay out questions that help bring them to understand what's happening and why it's going wrong on their end. And I try to say, basically, what does the teacher need in order to be successful so that they can help my child be successful? So it doesn't always seem like I'm yelling at them, you're not doing this, that, and the other for my kid. It's more like I'm your ally, so how do we do this together?
I appreciate that. I appreciate that approach. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take us into a completely different direction, Joanne, because
Sure.
I want to talk about your book.
Oh, thanks.
I know we didn't talk, the book is not in your story, but I can't wait for people to have an opportunity. So just tell us everything.
Sure. The book is called Fall in Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance. So I never thought I was going to write a book, even though everyone was like, you should write a book. But I had actually a Board of Education administrator asked me to come and speak to a class that she was teaching, a college class for these women who wanted to be special educators. And I was telling them about my story, and they kept, every time I gave a speech there, they would say, you have to write a book, you have to write a book. And I thought, you know what? Educators need to understand what's happening on the parent side. I guess I need to write the book. So I started writing, and initially it had nothing to do with dance at all. And I wrote a first draft, and I went to a workshop class, and the memoir teacher said, hey, dance, that's your hook. And I was like, really? I love dance, and I completely abandoned it and thought that was it. I'm done with it. But, these things never leave you, right? So dance was always a part of my thinking, even though I didn't realize it. So in the process of writing this book, the more I looked at the dance that I included and the more I thought about dance, the more I realized, I can, generalize the skills that I used in dance and all the lessons that I learned there and apply them to my life. They're life lessons. They're not just dance lessons. So I took a closer look at that. And then I started saying, okay, how does it make sense? And, how can I apply it to all of the conflicts that I was feeling as a parent? And ultimately, the other goal of the book, I had written an essay years ago called Bury My Son Before I Die. And in it, I talk about, having this son who I'm doing everything I can to keep him alive. And yet I'm terrified about what happens to him if I die first. And the response blew me away. All these parents were contacting me. And this one mom said, for the first time ever, I don't feel like a monster, and I'm not the only one having these thoughts. And I lost it, because I was like, oh my God, this poor mom is in a situation similar to mine, and she's feeling ashamed about that. And that's not what we should be doing to ourselves as parents. So I felt really strongly that I wanted to focus on all the conflict that I really feel like are unresolvable conflicts, but there's ways to live with them, so that's how it really all ended up coming together. And I had in college performed Jose Limon is a classic modern dance company. And one of his pieces is There Is a Time, based on Ecclesiastes 3, to everything there is a season. And so that was like the most important experience I had ever had as a dancer. And so it ended up being the structure of the book. So each chapter takes a part of the psalm and a dance lesson and a dichotomy of special needs parenting.
I love this so much. As a writer myself, I'm always looking for the metaphors in life. And this is so powerful. This is so deep. This is so rich. And, when I was reading about you, it's like I could feel it in my body, like how powerful dance is. I love dance. And I think like there could be such release for us parents who carry so much if we could just move our body in certain ways. I know that I love exercise, but there's something about when you're, thinking about dance and just healing and recovery through dance, which I don't think I've ever thought of until I encountered you. And I just think there's so much available to us out there.
Yeah.
Through dance and movement.
It's wild. So for kids, there was dance therapy. We'd have a dance therapist come in and work with the preschoolers that I was teaching. So yeah, no, it's rich. it's rich with that. Modern dance in particular, and why I felt like it ended up really speaking to me and needing to do this project. It's all about using gravity in order to generate movement. So you have to go down to go up. You have to fall to recover.
That's the title. Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Okay.
Exactly. And also just as a dancer, pain is very much a part of dancing and of life. And I feel like, when we're really struggling, a lot of people want to push it aside, or a lot of times people say like, you need to go get medicine, like go get medicated. And I'm nothing against that. But I also felt like you need to spend time with your pain, give it the attention it deserves, and then try to focus on other things that are working well. And that's very much a big part of what I try to do. Like you have to allow yourself the moments, right? I feel like attending to the moment is not specific to the good times. Just because it's bad doesn't mean you just push it aside. I feel like I have to live in it to get through it. So writing this book and revolving around dance, I feel like it just helped me express that.
And how did you get to the place of living in it, allowing yourself to live in it and feel it versus pushing it away? Because I feel like for so many of us, it's such a knee-jerk reaction to push it away, unless we really train ourselves to pause and to feel and to go through it and move through it, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that was very much a part of my growing up. I grew up in a Brooklyn Italian household, and, we're very emotional people. So my mother hid nothing,
I love that. My mother hid nothing.
So part of the backstory, my father died when I was just about 9 years old, and he died on the morning of my brother's wedding day. So it was, very dramatic and traumatic experience. And so as a family, we coped with that pretty openly. So there was a lot of talk about, death a lot, all the time, probably more than most families. So I think that I was raised, just to say like, okay, yeah, this is the full extent of what it is to be a human being. And it's okay to feel that. It's okay to express that. Like nothing you are thinking or anything you can say is invalid in this household. You can just say it. We might have to fight it out, but we'll get past it and it's fine.
Wow, that's a gift. That's a gift.
Tremendous.
That you've been given. How extraordinary. Joanne, what is your hope for this book? What are you hoping the impact will be?
Yeah, I really hope that parents who are feeling isolated and feeling ashamed, get to see this and say, okay, I'm really not alone and I can validate myself. I hope that educators and doctors and therapists get to take a glimpse at, these are the things that some parents experience but don't share typically. And I hope that other people challenge themselves to just sit in my experience, as hard as it sometimes can be, and realize what our culture, the position that our culture puts us in, and what it does to parents when they have children with disabilities.
Where can everybody find you? Where can everybody find your book?
All the information about the book is on my website, which is special-educationmom.com. And the book is available for pre-sale right now, anywhere you can find books, your favorite local bookstore or Amazon or bookshop. Yeah, it's easily findable.
That's so great. Joanne, so great to meet you and so great to spend this time with you. And I'm excited for your book. I'm excited for parents to read your book. And maybe we'll purchase a bunch for one of our retreats and put it in our Brave bags. That would be really special. Thanks so much for listening today. Do us a favor and leave us a review and a rating so that this podcast can get into the ears and the hearts of more and more moms. Did you know that Brave Together Parenting Podcast is an extension of our nonprofit organization, We Are Brave Together? We Are Brave Together serves an international community of caregiving moms, offering support groups that are virtual and in-person, educational resources, and low-cost weekend retreats. And we have published our first anthology of caregiving stories entitled Becoming Brave Together, Heroic, Extraordinary Caregiving Stories from Mothers Hidden in Plain Sight. It will encourage and validate every parent caregiver. To join us today, go to wearebravetogether.org. Our support and sisterhood awaits you. Brave Together Parenting Podcast is for entertainment and education purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional care and should not be relied on for medical or mental health advice. The use of any content on our podcast, links, show notes, or on our website is to be done at your own personal risk. Please seek out a professional to assess your own medical or mental health concerns because we are all beautifully complex and the content of this podcast is for a broad audience.